say is at a crucial stage. It's not because of foreign wars we wage. It's more to do with the colors blue and red. Too many laws and too much government. Can you tell me where the Constitution went? The Bill of Rights is just hanging by a thread. So many people try to cross the border, and politicians build a new world order. Too many minds are convinced they should be led. I've gotta be free the way God made men, and I won't be ruled by the damn UN. Taking your right to self-defense. They say you're safer, but they don't make sense. Dangerous ones will not turn into guns. All the unions always ask for more. All we buy is made on foreign shores. Come a day when there'll be real hell to pay. I've gotta be free the way God made men, and I won't be ruled by the damn UN.
Hello and welcome everybody to this bonus broadcast of Tap Into the Truth. With you as always, I'm your ever so humble host, a little tongue-tied, but still humble, Tim Tapp. Coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee. I hope that you are having a fantastic day wherever you are and whatever you may be doing, with all of the usual caveats, of course. So, as I mentioned, this is a bonus broadcast today, and trying to make up for a little bit of time away from the broadcast. Definitely want to make sure that more content is coming forward. The great thing about content that is being recorded right here at Spreaker, which is where this is originating from today, and one of the many platforms that I've been known to broadcast on from time to time, is that this will go directly to iHeartRadio. This will go directly to SoundCloud. So if you want to check out Tap Into the Truth at SoundCloud. I've had a long-running issue with SoundCloud. I've had a membership over there for a while, but I've never been able to get the upload to work properly. Well, all that has been taken care of now, and brand new shows broadcast from here will be uploaded, and of course, audio will go to YouTube as well. Everything directed over here. The fun part about that is we also still have the regular broadcast over at BTR, which, of course, get archived over here. And everything that gets archived over here still goes to iHeartRadio. So if you're new to the show, if you're an iHeart listener, and you're finding me for the first time there, well, enjoy the show. Let other people know about it, and let's move forward. Okay, why do I need a bonus broadcast, you may ask? Well, it's because for the last week, I have not been able to broadcast on the regular schedule. Part of that has been largely due to family priorities. And, of course, that never changes, but nothing's more important than family. And, of course, when you have a family, sometimes living up to the needs of that family get in the way of simple things like making time to broadcast. However, I'm back. There are several things that I need to get off my chest about news stories that are, well, not quite as timely as they were at the time I would have broadcast. So, we'll talk about that. But, before I get into that, I would like to remind everyone that this is a bonus broadcast today, second one of the day, which means the first one already took place. I'd like to thank Megan Barth for being part of that. The question there, the title of the show, are Never Trumpers trying to give the U.S. House of Representatives to the Democrats? Okay, that wasn't the actual title. Just are they trying to give the House away to the Democrats? But you can find that already here at Spreaker. You can find it over at BTR. You can find it at iTunes. You can find it at Stitcher.com. You can find it at TuneIn.com. And I would imagine you can probably find it at iHeart by now. So check that broadcast out from earlier. Megan Barth, fantastic guest. Had a very good conversation with her. Now, meat and potatoes. That intro, have special permission to utilize from Mr. Matt Fitzgibbons. Please take a little time to sneak over to patriotmusic.com. Check out Matt's other projects. You will not be sorry. If you already have, if you're a regular listener to the show and you've already been over to patriotmusic.com a few times, check it out again. Keep checking it out. Matt has other projects he's working on. You never know when something new is going to sneak on there, and it's probably well worthwhile. All right, so what's some of the other things? Upcoming quick reminders. I will be appearing on Infidels Are Watching as a guest upcoming this month on the 22nd. That's Kel Fritz's show on the Global Patriot Network. For those of you who are not familiar with it, check it out. It's an entire network of shows that is dedicated to counter jihad and to educating people about the threat of political Islam, which is a real thing. And for those of you who don't understand that or don't get it, please don't send your hate towards me. Spend some time researching, because like I say at the end of every show, don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourself. Also, I'd like to thank Ron Edwards, host of the Ron Edwards Experience, and of course the purveyor of the Edwards Notebook, commentary that you can be heard multiple radio stations across the nation. Ron was kind enough to have me on as a guest this past Friday, and it was a good time, although the problem with the formatting there on terrestrial radio is it's just so hard to sneak everything in between commercial breaks. But we did our best. We tried to hit as many topics as we could, but it's just difficult to have an in-depth conversation with only 1 hour to play with and all the terrestrial interruptions. But I love Ron. You can find Ron over here as well. Great show. And again, thank you, Ron. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of things today, shall we? We'll go ahead and start with the title story, but there's several stories I want to get to. So we will blast as quickly as we can through each and every one of them. But let's start with the notion that Kanye West is a Russian agent. All right, so it's being called the Kanye effect at this point, and it's very interesting. A lot of conservatives now all of a sudden are holding Kanye up as a great example, and they're getting really excited about him, and it's all premature. But I don't want to poo-poo on him, all right? We talked earlier today in a previous broadcast about some of the Kanye stuff, and I said it's something that I never thought would happen on my broadcast. I find myself having to defend Kanye West from the attack he is now under from the left. But the most surprising thing is the fact that Kanye really hasn't gotten a full embrace of conservative ideas. You know, he's not full on board with conservatism across the board. In fact, the only thing he's really come out and said, other than the fact that he supports Donald Trump, which that in and of itself isn't necessarily a conservative viewpoint, as it should be a standard American viewpoint, because everything Donald Trump has done to this point has been for the betterment of America. So Americans should support Donald Trump trying to protect and do what's best for America. I don't know where anything gets lost in translation there, but of course we have a large number of people that just don't seem to understand that America First is not a non-American concept. Only the leftists think that, and that's because the leftists want to pervert and twist and change the meanings. They want to change the meaning of words. They want to change the meaning of thought by virtue of controlling the language. And when it all is said and done, the leftists just want to see the Constitution completely shredded. They want to see the Constitution forgotten. They want to see the Constitution thought of as an old, antiquated document that means nothing in the modern world. And the reason they want that is because the Constitution, quite clearly, the United States Constitution, enunciation is important, I should try harder. The United States Constitution is easily the greatest document ever created, aside from the Holy Bible, just because it's timeless. Everything in the Constitution still applies today, and it is, in my opinion, the greatest document ever created because it clearly states, first, that governments are not meant to be all-powerful. The Constitution of the United States is a list specifically of powers and authority the federal government has, branch by branch. What is executive authority? What is legislative authority? What is judicial authority? What are the limits? What are the responsibilities? How do they stand side by side? How are they co-equal? How do they provide checks and balances? That's what the U.S. Constitution is. It was created with the purpose in mind of simply one thing: balance and protecting the rights of both the majority of the people and the minority of the people. That's why we don't have a democracy. We have a constitutionally federated republic. We have that because it is the only way to guarantee that minorities still have an equal voice, a voice that cannot be simply ignored. For those who call out and talk about democracy, well, that's fine, but democracy is nothing more than two wolves and a sheep getting together and voting to decide who to have or what to have for dinner. Minorities don't fare well in true democracies. So those of you who are calling out for democracy and talking about the damage to our democracy, you need to rethink the definitions and understand, first and foremost, the United States of America is not a democracy. Can't tell you how many times I've had to say this and people still don't get it. The United States of America is a constitutionally federated republic. We have some democratic principles within our selection process for those we send, we hire, we elect to go do the people's business. But at the end of the day, the way this nation was set up is each and every individual is a sovereign within this great nation. We're supposed to be free to pursue our interests, pursue life, liberty, and our happiness. And the Declaration of Independence lays it out clearly, and the Constitution was designed to protect our rights, some of which they specifically enumerated in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and some of which they specifically lay out belong to the states and then to the individuals. This is part of our history. This is part of what makes America different than every other place on the planet. But see, the leftists, they don't like that. They want to see the Constitution done and forgotten, and they cannot stand for people to get the strange idea that it's okay to be an individual. Now, here's what I can't stand about where we're at with our culture wars. As I've mentioned a few times, this is a show, and if you go far enough back in the archives, you go back and check out older episodes, especially some of the earliest ones, some of which are kind of embarrassing to listen to right now when I do go back and check out some of it. A lot of great content mixed in here and there, but when I was first getting used to this, there's a lot of room for improvement. I'll leave it like that. And you can hear that. But if you're patient enough to go through, number one, you'll hear the evolution of where I was then and where I'm at now. But number two, you will come across a lot of great content, a lot of which, if you'll look at the dates, I was talking about well ahead of the curve. Now, I'm proud of that. I'm not necessarily trying to say, ooh, look at me, I'm great. But I am saying that there were things that were issues that I was pointing out before the rest of the country realized was an issue. So pay close attention. When I bring you these things, pay close attention. That's all I'm saying. And I invite you to check it all out. Do what you need to do. Verify it. Do your own research. Make sure you get multiple sources when you do it, though. Don't trust just one or two sources. Do actual homework. But here's where we go. What I don't like about where the left is today is, first and foremost, the left is winning the culture war. This show has evolved from being mostly about hot news topics of the day and policy to being more about the culture war. And that's because during the time I've been doing this show, I've come to the realization that, politics, you're not going to win the day with policy. You're not going to win the arguments in policy unless you can win the arguments in the culture. It is where our culture is at that will determine and decide what political voices are heard and are most dominant and are most influential. So we have to win the culture war. And right now the left is winning the culture war. And the reason and the way the left does that is first and foremost by controlling the language. Words matter. Words have power. And when the meanings of words is played with, toyed with, tweaked, when they're able to plant ideas to make something sound innocuous that is actually dangerous, well, then the left wins. And then they follow the Alinsky rules. You know, the rules for radicals. When somebody disagrees with you, you demonize them. You attack them. They become the enemy. And sadly enough, this is where Kanye West finds himself right now. Not because he's actually embraced full-on conservatism. Not because he is 90% on board with the leftists. But because he's about 10% in contrast to the leftist. So what's happened? They're attacking him. He disagrees roughly about 10%. And that's enough for the attacks to start. We've got a Detroit radio station that now has banned him. A Detroit rap radio station that has banned Kanye West music. Because Kanye made a statement about slavery that they're trying to twist into making it sound like Kanye was saying slavery was a choice. The words were there, but you have to understand how Kanye communicates. It's a lot like Donald Trump. He's an imprecise communicator. He'll say things that are hot on his mind. And sometimes he'll discover that he needs clarification. For a lot of people, though, especially people who have listened to Kanye talk in the past, it was pretty clear, pretty evident right up off the bat that when he said that 400 years of slavery, somewhere there it seems like there was a choice, what he's really referencing is a mindset. And mindsets normally are a matter of choice, but the thing is you don't normally realize you're making the choice. And I heard an example made not too long ago, and if you listened to today's earlier show, forgive me for repeating this, but if you did not, then this is new to you. I think it's a really great analogy because it's perfect for what we're talking about here. And the discussion was involving a kid who wanted to go to the circus, and his favorite thing at the circus were the elephants. And the elephants were so big and so strong, and they were able to do just about anything they wanted to, and they were using them for heavy lifting and for helping to move stuff around as they were setting up the circus. And so the young boy takes a look at the elephants and sees that they're chained to a little stake that couldn't have been much more than 3 feet into the ground, and he realizes the elephants were so strong, if they really pulled on that, they could pull those stakes right up out of the ground, that these chains could not hold them. Yet they would go as far as the chain would allow them to go, and they would stop. And the father explained to the son that those elephants had been chained like that since they were tiny. So they were first able to walk on their own. They were put in these chains. And because they would try to run, and they couldn't pull these stakes up then because they weren't big enough, they weren't strong enough, they learned that they could go as far as the chain, and that is it. So as they got older, they stopped trying to pull the chain. They stopped trying to pull the stake out of the ground. And once they were strong enough that they could, that thought never crossed their mind to go ahead and do it. They had never been able to before, so as soon as the chain pulled tight, they would stop. That's the mindset that we're talking about. So for 400 years of slavery, Kanye was talking about the fact that at some point in the game, there were strong enough numbers that had they truly decided to rebel, had they truly decided to end the slavery themselves, they could have. But they didn't, because they were slaves to the mindset of being slaves. And that much of the slave mentality still exists within certain communities. It's the very same mentality that the Democratic Party here in the United States keeps insisting upon when they claim that they're what's best for black Americans. When they insist that their policies do the most good, despite the fact that black unemployment is at its lowest in decades under Donald Trump's economic policies. And in fact, Hispanic unemployment is at record highs. It's never been as low as it is now. Well, Democrats can't run against that. So here they get an opportunity to have someone who cares about the black community in Kanye West. Excuse me. So Kanye, he got to meet Obama. He talked to Obama, and he realized that Obama's policies were hurtful to the black community. But then Obama's policies were hurtful to all Americans in general. Socialism doesn't work. There is no place in the world where socialism has ever been truly effective. You can say what you want to about capitalism and how evil and how it's driven by profits and greed, but no other system allows more individual wealth to be developed. No other system allows more individual liberty to be achieved, and no other system requires you to give up so much of yourself as does socialism. So between the two, I'll take greed-driven capitalism over anything else, because you are free to stand or fall based on your own efforts. And while you will have obstacles to overcome, the only thing that the government can guarantee you, if you want a guaranteed outcome, is equality in the misery department. They can make you equally poor, and they can make you equally miserable, but they can't do anything else. So he's been banned from the rap station. Why? Because this is what the left does. Kanye has left the reservation, or should I say, the plantation in this case. That was the reference, wasn't it? The metaphorical plantation. Kanye has left it. He's not on board with the Democrats anymore. A trend that seems to be favoring among younger voters in the U.S. right now anyway. Millennials seem to be souring a bit on the Democrats, even Bernie. Not that Bernie was truly a Democrat, but hey, what are you going to do? Socialist pretending to be a Democrat. So Kanye's off the plantation. He's down with Trump. Trump is helping the black community. Trump is helping America, period. Kanye sees that for what it is. And the one message that Kanye has sent more than any place else, more than anything else he's said, other than a lot of pro-Trump statements, and even so much as to say that they're brothers, they both have dragon energy, a lot of other great quotes that are fun to talk about. Blowing the heads out and making liberals' eyes bleed when they hear it, which is also part of why they're so much fun. All that, the simple message is, it's a very easy one, but it's one that, of course, the leftists can't afford for anybody who's actually going to vote to get. We can't let you get this message. We can't let you understand that this is truth. And that message is simply this. It's okay to think differently than the other people around you. It's okay to disagree with groupthink. It's okay, and this is where actual liberals would stand up and applaud Kanye, rather than try and tear him down, it's okay to be original. I mean, that is what we're constantly told by the left, isn't it? That it's okay to be unique and it's okay to be yourself. Well, being yourself means thinking originally, too. That you don't have to follow the groupthink. There's a reason why organizations like the Log Cabin, the Friends of Abe or the Log Cabin Republicans, it's a group of homosexuals that support the Republican Party. You know, that's one of those things where when you're supposed to believe, you're supposed to accept these wild stereotypes, and you're supposed to believe that there's no way that a homosexual or a lesbian is ever going to support anybody other than the Democrats, because the Democrats are on their side. You're supposed to believe that if you're a woman, you're never supposed to support anybody but the Democrats, because they're on your side. If you're a minority, you're supposed to be on the Democratic plantation. And you're not supposed to veer off. You're not supposed to leave. That's the equivalent of breaking your chains. Kanye West has simply said, think for yourself. Decide for yourself. Vote for whoever you want to. If that's still the Democrat, then so be it. But this is why, and he said so, this is why I've decided to support Donald Trump. This is why I will probably not be voting Democrat again. And he lays out that case. But the message is still a simple message, and he's letting them make up their own mind. He simply says why he's made this stance. That is free speech at its finest. That is Kanye West doing exactly what America was built upon. And while I'm still not out there saying, ooh, yo, go Kanye, because I'm still not real sure where he's at with this other 90% of apparently very leftist ideology that he still has. If he does come on around and embraces conservatism in its many forms, then I'll say, yes, you go Kanye. But in the meanwhile, to me, he still remains just kind of a weird dude. He said a lot of things that legitimately, well, sound kind of crazy. He has had an emotional meltdown, but see, here's where the fun begins. When he had this meltdown in the past, and again, we talked about this a little bit earlier today, but when he had the meltdown in the past, well, it was because he was overworked and he was just stretching himself too thin, and it was part of being that creative genius who was bringing us his brand of music and then his brand of business as he was doing his other ventures and his association with Adidas and all these other things that Kanye has done throughout the years. That it was perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with having a breakdown. He got the help he needed and he's back. But now the left points out he's had this breakdown, and they're asking the question, has he had another breakdown? Suddenly Kanye talks about leaving the plantation, and suddenly they want you to believe that Kanye has lost his ever-loving mind. Before, talking about being the Black Jesus, he's perfectly sane. But now, because he's talking about liking Donald Trump, well, there must be something wrong. So the left is attacking, and the left is attacking, and the left is attacking. Being banned on rap stations in Detroit. Having Snoop Dogg Photoshop pictures of Kanye and making him look all white. Essentially, I guess that's even worse than calling him an Uncle Tom. Practically broke the internet when Snoop Dogg put that up on Twitter. And you know, Snoop Dogg is welcome to think whatever the hell he wants, but I wish that a man who has made the most of his money recently having music videos where he's assassinating Donald Trump in effigy would take a few seconds and realize that if he's going to express himself in that fashion, that it should be okay for someone else to express themselves in the other direction. And it doesn't make you white. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you soft. It just means you have a different point of view. But they've taken it even further. And he was accused by one of the writers over at The Atlantic of being a Russian agent, an agent of the Kremlin. So we're talking about Eric Garland. He is a strategic intelligence analyst, evidently, who occasionally writes for The Atlantic on the subject of Russian collusion. And Eric has come up with the perfect explanation as to why Kanye West has suddenly been red-pilled and is now a dedicated supporter of President Donald Trump. Now, Kanye West, he says, is obviously, and I think he's serious about this when he wrote it, I think Eric really believes this, he says Kanye West is obviously a Russian agent sent by the Kremlin to infiltrate American pop culture and turn the tide of popular opinion towards Donald Trump. You know, it's brilliant. I have to give him that. I mean, seriously, how did we miss it? How did we not know? All these previous rap albums, all these strange and unusual things, all this embracing of everything that was left, even marrying Kim Kardashian, marrying into that family. How? How did we not understand that this was a deep state Russian plot? Now, Garland laid out his theory in what I'd have to express as surprising detail. He suggested that Kanye had connected somehow with former Trump aide Roger Stone, bolstering his theory with evidence, of course air quotes work great over the radio, but evidence that Kanye met briefly with Trump ahead of the presidential election before spending time in Moscow, where he was, no doubt, recruited by Vladimir Putin himself to play a key role in fermenting Russian influence in the United States. Kanye West did, in fact, go to Russia the week after meeting Donald Trump. But at the time, Kanye, who is a fashion designer, in addition to being a self-proclaimed world-class genius, he was trying to form a partnership with Russian fashion designer Gosha Rubitsky. At least I think that's the pronunciation. That's about as close as I'm going to get. So no disrespect, Gosha. My little East Tennessee tongue has a little trouble with Russian accents. But he was trying to meet with the Russian fashion designer, and he got inspiration from avant-garde Russian fashion artists for his new line of Yeezy clothing accessories. So even, as I recall, Vogue, which is a fashion magazine still, essentially, although sometimes you wonder with some of what they put in there, Vogue covered Kanye's trip from start to finish. What was really fun is the Daily Beast actually asked Eric Garland about his theory. I'm trying to find out if he was serious or if this was a joke. And he doubled down. He at least believes that it's for real. Now, the kicker is, of course, that Kanye West has a Russian agent. He'd have a hard time keeping it to himself. Kanye is not the sort of man you hire for clandestine work. He tends to announce even the smallest movement on his projects across social media because those announcements feed into his story of being a remarkable visionary, which Kanye is convinced, and in Kanye's mind, he is the greatest visionary of our time. I mean, that's what led him to say he was the Black Jesus, after all. But the good news is that Democratic activists have kind of picked up the line and are now pondering whether Eric Garland is, in fact, onto something. Scott Dworkin, the head of the Democratic coalition, tweeted this past Wednesday that he was deeply concerned the implications of Garland's findings. He used the word findings. This is a theory that he just sat back and mentioned. There was nothing to find. Most of this was common knowledge. He just pieced it together. Or even if it wasn't common knowledge, it was readily available information. I'll put it like that. Most people who follow Kanye West don't care that his agent happens to be Russian. They also don't care that he happens to make a trip to Russia. That's part of what Kanye does. He has went to lots of other places too. But you know what? I'm happy to see the leftists going down the road of Kanye West as a Russian agent. They should keep going that direction. They also should keep banning him from rap stations. They should keep telling the public that this will be the key to Kanye's demise, that this will bring him down, this will end his career, because they're trying to torpedo him at this point. When they come out and say things like this, that is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to torpedo his career. When they come out and do these things, they're trying to make him irrelevant. And they're trying to make you think that because he's saying these things, that this is proof once and for all that, the treatment for his breakdown before, it didn't take. He's still crazy. That's what they want you to believe. But the Kanye effect is real. Early last week, a poll was conducted of black males between the age of 18 and 25. And in that time, from Trump's inauguration, support for Donald Trump had more than doubled. People are hearing Kanye West and they're understanding what he's saying, and more importantly, they're not listening to what the left is trying to tell them. See, that's the thing. It's a lot like Donald Trump, in so much as Donald Trump is not a creation of the media. And that's the thing the media can't understand. The media can destroy you if they help to create you. But they can't do anything about you if they didn't create you. They can't do anything about you if they had nothing to do with you getting where you're at. And you see, the media believes that they did in Kanye's case. But you have CNN writers telling you that nobody should even allow Kanye to speak. Now, does that sound very First Amendment of you? Does that sound very liberal of you? Because a classical liberal would be willing to put their own life on the line to protect your right to express yourself. But in a CNN op-ed piece that was recently published, Kanye West, at least according to this piece, Kanye West should not be allowed to have a platform to express his opinion. Ernest Owens, the editor of the Philadelphia magazine's G Philly and the CEO of Ernest Media Empire, LLC, said, quote, "The time has come to stop amplifying his platform when he continues to misconstrue facts and distract the public from truth." Shutting him down is not a matter of censoring opinions. I'll just continue. It's a matter of being responsible in how we elevate or endorse the cult of celebrity in situations that further espouse toxic lies. So at this point, any outlet that continues to allow Kanye West a platform to knowingly speak such misinformation is either enabling the former or exploiting his celebrity status for ratings. Kanye has been very supportive of President Trump recently. And the Hollywood celebrities and other leftists, especially in the mainstream media, have not been happy about it. Owens went on to say in a different part of his op-ed piece that West is entitled to his own opinion but not his own facts. Now, how many times have we on the right said that about the left? How many times have we conservatives pointed out that the left prefers to run on emotion rather than facts and logic? It seems they've at least been listening to what we say, but now they want to establish this idea. Again, they're jumping on the notion, the concept of that what Kanye said about 400 years of slavery being a choice. They want to pretend like he's not referring to the mindset. They know what he was talking about. They understand him far better than most conservatives do. But if you listen and then you have heard Kanye in the past, it's easy to get. It shouldn't even have to be explained. If you are someone, however, that didn't hear Kanye actually say this, then by all means, talk to someone who's willing to explain it to you. Because it is this simple. He was talking about the mindset. And honestly, when you talk about a mindset, you are talking about a choice. He's not implying, he's not saying that they chose to become slaves in Africa. They chose to be sold off to the European slave traders. They chose to be brought over here where about half of them would die in transit before they could make it across the ocean because the conditions on these ships were so horrible. He's not insinuating for a second that people were raising their hands and volunteering to become a slave. But what he is saying, that after so long, once you see that your numbers are raised up to a certain level, you end up being like those elephants in the circus that we were talking about earlier. You end up questioning whether or not they made a conscious choice or whether subconsciously they were enrooted in this choice. The bottom line is there were always some that were trying to escape, but most would never risk it. Just like there's a ton of celebrities that are actually conservative or somewhat libertarian, or at the very least not on board with every lunacy idea that we see pushed by the leftist. But they're afraid to speak out. They're trapped on that plantation too. The metaphorical plantation of the leftists that's currently controlling the Democratic Party. They are afraid to push back. And the reason they're afraid to do so is because they see these kind of attacks. These people are trying to end Kanye West's career. They don't want to see him on reality TV anymore. They don't want to see him making music videos. They don't want to hear his music on the radio until he comes back to the plantation, until he is firmly ensconced back with all the leftists and ready to spout out whatever leftist nonsense they want. He has no home there, and he has no quarter. There is no place that he can hide. You will have CNN people running op-eds telling you that he has no business having a platform as long as he's saying stuff like this. And again, the message is just the message that it's okay to think differently than the folks around you. You will have writers at The Atlantic constantly telling you that he's a Russian agent. Based on the way this theory was presented, I really think Eric Garland believes it. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing, and it has spread to Kanye. But this is how the left tries to destroy people. So I stand here putting these examples in front of you and explaining once and for all that no one should ever have their livelihood threatened because they expressed an opinion. There should not be a coordinated effort by the mainstream media and other people in the industry to end someone's career for expressing an opinion, unless the opinion you're expressing is vile and evil and sick. I would never say that someone should lose their job for supporting Hillary Clinton. I would suggest maybe they should have a psychiatric evaluation, but that's just the mean in me. And in truth, I would only be kidding. I understand why people have an allure to the leftist ideology. I understand how it sounds awesome to think that the government can just continue to come up with money when you don't understand that that money still comes from people. And it's being taken from these people. Sometimes not even legally, according to the standards the government itself has created. There should be limits to government spending. There should be limits to government power. And we should be free to live as much as possible. The government should be doing a bare minimum of providing the goods, providing the services that they're designed to provide. Our federal government should have only the authority and the power that they have been granted by the Constitution of the United States. Anything else must fall into the hands of the states and the people. We need to stop all this crazy talk about the ending of the Electoral College, because the Electoral College was designed, again, to make sure minority voices can't be squashed. We need to get the 17th Amendment repealed. We need to get the states once again selecting senators. We need to make sure that states' rights are no longer ignored. And we need to make these things happen, not because it feels good to me, not because it's going to be bad for anyone, although the Democrats will come out kicking, punching, screaming, and gouging eyes and trying to turn Antifa out on the loose on everybody for it, but because it's how our republic was built and it's how it would work best. The federal government can't just run roughshod over the states and the states' rights if half of the legislature is set aside specifically for protecting the states, the way our government was first created. The House is supposed to be the voice of the people. The Senate is supposed to be the voice of the states. And the chief executive is supposed to balance the needs of both and execute his authority as the chief executive. And the judiciary is simply supposed to operate in accordance to allowing or not allowing laws to be passed and signed into law based on whether or not they apply and can be applied fairly, evenly to everyone and still meet the litmus test of being constitutional. A lot of people wouldn't like a return to that. But that's where we need to be. And it's not because I would be happy about everything that happens, because it would take away some things that the federal government's doing right now that I happen to like. But it's things that our state governments and our local governments, counties or cities, whatever, it's things that they should be doing, not the federal government. Can I say that this whole Russian collusion bit it's gotten a little out of hand, don't you think? At this point, Mueller should put an end to this. Mueller should just step up and say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry, guys. I tried as hard as I can. But there's just nothing here. Because first and foremost, there is no crime within the U.S. justice system as collusion. But even if there was collusion, there's no evidence of said collusion between Donald Trump as a candidate. In fact, most of the evidence that's been uncovered to this point kind of suggests the other way. They actually did some pro-Hillary stuff, some anti-Donald stuff, after it looked like Donald was actually going to do fairly well. But between the federal judge, which we talked about earlier today, along with VA hospital, I mean, check out the earlier broadcast. I don't want to rehash everything. It's a bonus broadcast for a reason. This is the stuff that I haven't been able to get to. So check out the other stuff. Talked about in depth this Russian, this Reagan appointee that stepped up and told the Mueller team that their efforts to get Paul Manafort seems on the face to be exceeding the mandate, that exceeds the scope of what their investigation was intended to do. And he let go. And so we talked about that earlier. But, you know, this wouldn't be the first time that this has gotten screwed up. In fact, the media has screwed up on the Trump story multiple times at this point. A lot was made this past week of the correction that had to be issued by NBC back this past Thursday on the story about wiretaps and Michael Cohen. And unfortunately, this is just another reminder of the many media mistakes on the Russian collusion story. NBC initially claimed that the federal investigators were listening in on Cohen's phone calls. But as it turns out, they had what's called a pen register warrant. And what that means simply is that they could see who Cohen spoke to on the phone, but they really didn't have any access to the calls themselves. They couldn't hear what was being said. So that part was wrong. Unfortunately for the press, the obsession to prove collusion, and it has been an obsession, it's clear. Obsession, obsession, obsession. Their obsession to prove the collusion has dampened their journalistic abilities, evidently, assuming some of them actually had some to begin with. I mean, modern journalism is a pale reflection of what journalism once meant. But in the process, it's leading to seemingly endless list of corrections and retractions and apologies. Here's just a few of them that I can name right here. CNN accused Don Jr. of the WikiLeaks collusion. You guys remember that last December? CNN's Manu Raja reported that WikiLeaks emailed Donald Trump Jr. to give him access to stolen documents of a full 10 days before they were released to the public. Unfortunately for CNN, it turns out that their sources gave them the wrong date. Don Jr. actually received the email with access to the stolen documents on September 14th, 2016, after they had already been released to the general public. ABC got involved, tanked the stock market with fake news about Flynn. ABC was forced to suspend Brian Ross after he falsely reported that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was prepared to testify that then-candidate Donald Trump ordered him to make contact with the Russians. The stock market dropped a few hundred points at that news, but as it turned out, that was fake. It wasn't real. And they still get mad if you call them fake news. I think I would rather be called fake news than just be called liars. Because a lot of this has been cases where they knew what they were saying wasn't quite right. There's been intentional misleading, despite the fact that they're trying to keep enough truth in the story that you can check part of it, and someplace like Snopes will come back and tell you, well, it's mostly true. Several of the words they used in the report are words that are in the truth about the story, so it's mostly true. ABC later had to clarify that Flynn was actually prepared to testify that Trump asked him to contact Russia while the administration was transitioning into the office. Don't do it beforehand. Do it when we win. As we start to do the transition, then I want you to start making these connections. Just FYI, that's pretty standard preparation for an incoming president. It happens a lot. We have the Mooch. He's not under investigation. CNN earned another spot on the list of mistakes made by the media for their shoddy reporting about former Trump advisor Anthony Scaramucci. Back in June, CNN relied on a single unnamed source to claim that Scaramucci was under investigation for a meeting he took with a Russian banker prior to Trump's inauguration. Now, the Mooch denied the story, and CNN later gave him a much-deserved apology. Oh, yeah, and 3 CNN employees resigned over the botched piece. When you resign from CNN, it means you're doing that to keep from getting fired. Just FYI. Bloomberg's dirty Deutsche Bank scoop. Bloomberg initially reported back in December that special counsel Robert Mueller had zeroed in on Trump by subpoenaing Deutsche Bank records for the incoming president and his family. Bloomberg later admitted that Mueller was looking for records relating to people affiliated with Trump. once again, not exactly the same thing, is it? Sessions exonerated. Last May, CNN was sure that Attorney General Jeff Sessions had botched protocol when he didn't list meetings he had had with the Russian ambassador on his security clearance forms. To CNN and other established media outlets, this was proof that Sessions was hiding something related to Russia. A little over 6 months later, CNN very quietly walked back the story, explaining that the FBI sent emails informing Sessions' aide that he didn't need to disclose those particular meetings on his forms because they were carried out in the course of his duties as a United States Senator, which he was before being tapped to be the Attorney General. Russians aren't just hacking the election, they're hacking our power grid. The Washington Post claimed in January of 2017 that Russians were hacking the U.S. power grid through a company in Vermont, only to change the story to say that only one laptop was infiltrated. It turns out that that one laptop was never even connected to the power grid. So, while there may have been an effort to hack into the power grid, and it was never conclusive that it was actually the Russians, by the way, in the story, it was a very poor attempt, and certainly not worthy of national news. Republicans funded the dossier. This is one of my favorites, because it's one that even I thought was true for a while. So I kind of fell for this one, I will tell you that much. But a number of news outlets have consistently claimed that Republicans initially paid for the anti-Trump Steele dossier, failing to note that the Steele dossier wasn't even contracted by Fusion GPS until after the GOP donors pulled funding. The Republican donors say that they paid Fusion for standard opposition research and that they have zero connection to the controversial dossier. Translation, certain Republicans had in fact reached out to Fusion GPS. But the Steele dossier didn't come into being until well after the Republicans were no longer seeking the use of Fusion GPS. But the media has perpetuated this particular falsehood so consistently that even former FBI Director James Comey was confused, repeating the line in an interview with Fox News when he was talking with Bret Baier. So Bret Baier actually corrected him on the spot, and he looked like Bret Baier had three heads, because it appeared that this was news to him, because he had been told several times. And like I said, I was under the impression that was true. It wasn't until just recently that that it came out that Republicans had actually stopped funding any type of opposition research with Fusion GPS well before Steele was contacted by them. So this was strictly a Hillary Clinton operation. CNN gets Comey prediction wildly wrong. Prior to former FBI Director James Comey's congressional testimony last June, CNN asserted that Comey was prepared to contradict a key claim by President Trump. The Comey told him he was not under investigation. Sadly for them, however, Comey's prepared testimony was released with the line, quote, "During our one-on-one meeting at Trump Tower, I offered that assurance that he was not under investigation." So guess what? Donald Trump had a lot of frustration that he wouldn't come out and tell everybody that he wasn't under investigation. But what Donald Trump didn't understand is the reason James Comey didn't want to say that is because James Comey knows exactly what Robert Mueller knows right now and is praying that no one will tell Donald Trump. Although by now, if his lawyers haven't, they aren't worth their salt. And I happen to know they're pretty good lawyers, so I'm pretty sure they have told him that just because you're not a target at the moment doesn't mean that can't change in the snap of a finger. What could change is you can become a target as quickly as they can get you to fall into a process crime trap. And the process crime that we're looking to trap him in right now would be perjury. And here's the problem with that. If you intentionally try to trap someone, if you intentionally try to get them to say something that at least on the level sounds like you are disagreeing with something else you've already said, if your previous statements were under oath, even if what you're saying is not contradictory, it just sounds contradictory, it's entirely possible to make a perjury charge stick. Because all you have to do is make it look like you're contradicting statements you've made under oath. So obviously you were lying at one point or the other. It doesn't matter which. You've committed perjury. It's a process crime. And it's one that, when you are as imprecise as a communicator as Donald Trump is, and he is not a very precise communicator, he is good at talking directly to the American people because he doesn't use the jargon and slang that the typical political people would. He's not a politician. If you know Trump speak, then you can probably easily tell, well, okay, this is what he said, but here's what he really meant, and it's easy enough to understand. But you see, perjury charges don't work that way. And all they need is one of these activist judges that, for whatever reason, seems to think that the executive branch doesn't have the same authority under Donald Trump that it's had under every other previous president and would have had just as much authority under Hillary Clinton has she been elected. None of that matters. You get one of those judges and fine, you're guilty. Perjury, ba-da. Let's impeach. Let's impeach. Which is why I was asking the question in the earlier broadcast today, are the Never-Trumpers trying to give away the House? Give the House to the Democrats so that they can impeach. Although I really don't think they like Mike Pence much better. I really don't. Anyway, the 17 intel agencies lie. The media perpetuated a false claim from presidential candidate Hillary Clinton for months. The one that was insisting that all 17 intelligence agencies agree that Russia interference in the 2016 election. The New York Times, for example, rated that claim as true only to later say the exact opposite. See, only 4 intelligence agencies ultimately deemed Russia responsible for meddling because the other 13 have no business making judgments on the claim. As the New York Times succinctly explained, the rest were doing other work. Something else they've gotten wrong. Manafort's notes are a nothing burger. NBC botched its big scoop, claiming that Paul Manafort's notes from a meeting with a Russian lawyer included the word donations near a reference to the Republican National Committee. Turns out that not only did the word donations not appear in the Manafort notes at all, but the word donor didn't either. Politico had to correct the NBC report, leaving the Legacy Network looking awfully embarrassed. And, just FYI, here's a really good question to throw in with the mix. It's still relatively in question at this point. Did Cohen go to Prague? Because evidently this is a big part of the Michael Cohen business. So questions are being raised about a recent report that states Special Counsel Robert Mueller has evidence that Michael Cohen visited Prague in the summer of 2016. Now, the story would be huge because it would seem to corroborate a portion of the Steele dossier claiming that Cohen visited Prague at that time to meet with a Kremlin official. However, no other outlets have confirmed the report, and even anti-Trumpers are questioning its sourcing. So the media can't seem to get any of this right, and they're so desperate, and they believe in this the same as they believe in man-caused climate change. They believe in this the same as they believe that Hillary Clinton should have been the president, that somehow, some way, this has just been a bad dream. Well, Actually, it's been pretty good as far as America's concerned. All right, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and play the Edwards Notebook, and then Songs and Stories for Soldiers, tip of the day. And after we do that, I will come back. So stay with me through this ever so brief break. I'll be right back.
Another leftist judge throws U.S. sovereignty and our Constitution right under the bus. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, U.S. District Activist Judge John D. Bates has ordered the Trump administration to reopen and review applicants who apply for deportation protections under the Defense Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The judge also gave an ultimatum saying that the Department of Homeland Security has 90 days to provide solid reasoning for why the program should be terminated. Forget the fact that former President Obama imposed DACA on the United States to protect more than 800,000 children of illegal immigrant parents who were not authorized to legally be in the United States. The judge also falsely accused Trump of not explaining why he ended DACA. Bradford Berry, general counsel of the NAACP, expressed glee at the judge's decision to rule on behalf of criminals who have strolled into our republic illegally. I find that ironic that a so-called proponent of helping colored people would be happy that a leftist judge ruled on behalf of illegal immigrants who have been systematically helped by American leftists to displace many black Americans regarding economic opportunities, etc. The problem is, Mr. Berry's hatred of America and her sovereignty supersedes his desire to help colored people. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
This is Dan Perkins with your Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us Veterans Tip of the Day. Do you suffer from incontinence, rash, or have open sores due to medication that takes forever to heal? The VA is testing an FDA-approved medical device to treat these serious health issues. The product is called Rash Ends. So here's your Veterans Tip of the Day. Take advantage of this new healing technology. Go to their website, www.rashendz.com, and see if they can help you. If you tell them that you're a vet, you'll get a special price. This has been Dan Perkins with your Veterans Tip of the Day.
Seems like 1,000 years since we had real fears, but the old ones won't forget. These broken levee walls had a few close calls, but they haven't fallen yet. And you know the rain.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am back. Thanks for staying with me through the break. That last song, of course, The Rain is Coming, another Matt Fitzgibbon song. Please boogie on over to patriotmusic.com and check out everything he's got going over there. I promise you it'll be well worth your time. And if you already have, but it's been a while, check it out again. In fact, you should keep checking it out because you never know when something new is going to show up. Matt Fitzgibbon, tremendous historian, great musician, and very good friend to the show. Check out patriotmusic.com. You know, while I'm telling you to check stuff out, you can go ahead and check out the Tap Into the Truth website. That's TAPP Into the Truth. And over there, if you are so inclined, you're more than welcome to make a contribution to help keep the show growing, help me pay for new equipment and to continue to expand the audience and all that other wonderful stuff. You know, I hate doing the self-promotion crap. I'm not very good at it. Not really why I do this, but you know, a little bit of help would be good. So if anybody would like to contribute, you can go over there, and there's a link through PayPal that you can do that. And by all means, you know, if you are led to do that, I would appreciate it. And I'll let me know who you are. I'll be happy to mention you on the show for making contributions. Okay, so now, what is our next topic, you may ask? Well, we're still trying to catch stuff up. Looking at some of the other things, we did talk a lot about what else? What was I talking a lot about? Several of the major stories previous, but there's some other stories that I have not gotten to. I definitely want to talk a little bit more about Alfie Evans before I get off here tonight. But here's something that certainly falls into the culture war storyline, and I think it's important that we talk about stuff like this. In the state of Illinois, their state senate has voted to teach LGBT history in public schools. Now, the Illinois State Senate has approved a new bill requiring public schools to teach lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender history in public schools. In a 34-18 vote on Wednesday, the Senate passed the bill, drafted by Chicago Democratic Senator Heather Steans, S-T-E-A-N, Steans, I'm not sure. No disrespect intended, Senator, but I'm sorry. Anyway, Heather said that the bill dovetails with state law already on the books that requires public school students to learn the history of races and ethnicities. Not sure that LGBT qualifies as an ethnic background or a race, but regardless, went on to say, quote, by teaching students an inclusive curriculum, Illinois' classrooms will promote acceptance and a more accurate portrayal of history. She also said that according to the State Journal Register, LGBT students also will learn about people who had some similar qualities to them and became historical role models. In fact, as reported there, it says some education advocates and religious groups oppose the bill, but for different reasons. We have a clear directive from our membership to oppose all curricular mandates that come before the General Assembly. This is a quote from Zach Messersmith, who's the Director of Government Relations for the Illinois Association of School Boards. He went on to say that we believe that locally elected school boards should be able to determine curricula for their students as long as it meets the Illinois learning standards. Okay, well, that seems reasonable enough to me. But that also means that they're only opposing this not because of content or intent, but just because it's their general position to oppose any efforts by the state to impose any part of a curriculum on the local school systems. Has nothing to do with whether they think it's right or wrong, has nothing to do if they think it's indoctrination as opposed to education. It has nothing to do with any of that. But it's there, and that seems a reasonable expectation. Now, Christian groups like the Concerned Christian Americans, and the Illinois Family Institute cite their own religious objections for those same students' families, saying, quote, it is well known that the controversies of the transgender and homosexual movements are in direct contradiction to a clear Judeo-Christian beliefs of many in Illinois. This from the Illinois Family Institute lobbyist, Mr. Ralph Rivera. In a memo to legislators, he also said, quote, schools should teach that we should be respectful of each student and each person. This is what we all agree on. However, schools should not be used to advocate for lifestyles that are against the religious values of the students and parents. See, that to me is a reasonable statement. Nobody is saying that students shouldn't be pursuing whatever lifestyles, what have you. What they are saying is that schools should not be advocating for these lifestyles. And let's face it, this type of curriculum is exactly for that purpose. It's about glorifying and it's about normalizing. And while no one should ever be made to feel out of place, regardless of for whatever reason, there is still a big difference between acceptance of an individual who's different and forced glorification of these differences, especially ones where there are legitimate religious issues. And before we get any further, why should religion play a part in schools? Look, I hate to break it to everybody. It's become so ingrained in our society that so many people believe it to be true. a lot of judges have bought into it. A lot of educators have bought into it. A lot of local politicians have bought into it. But the bottom line is there is no separation of church and state demanded by the Constitution of the United States. There was a specific part of the Bill of Rights that says specifically that Congress shall pass no law involving the establishment of a national religion. We can't tell you you have to be Lutheran. We can't tell you you have to be Southern Baptist. We can't tell you you have to be Mormon. What we can tell you is that all religious faiths should be equally considered, and all religious faiths should be equally respected. The nation was built on Judeo-Christian beliefs. The nation is going to express those beliefs in public ways, and public expression of these beliefs is not prohibited. In fact, it's expected. It's practically required. But somehow or another, we've got this strange notion that just because somebody might say, let's pray before a high school football game, that is in some fashion, form, or some way, please explain to me how hurtful to people who don't share that belief. How does it hurt you to be exposed to that idea for just 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds? How does it hurt? I don't want to meet the person that is really, seriously injured in any form by virtue of having someone beside you praying out loud. I definitely even less want to meet the person that might be seriously injured by joining in. Freedom of religion is not the same thing as freedom from religion. It's never supposed to be that. But that's just a jumping off point here. This particular bill in Illinois would require every public elementary school and high school to include in its curriculum a full unit of instruction studying the significant role of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals in society. It specifies the instruction requirements. It requires the regional superintendent of schools to monitor a school district's compliance with the curriculum requirements, meaning that it's going to say, here's what has to be done for at least one full unit during your history class. And will hold the superintendents accountable should the principals in their school system or the individual teachers in their schools, one or more, refuse to teach this forced curriculum upon them. Now, I don't imagine there's very many teachers that actually would jump off the reservation on this one. Most teachers in this modern age, unfortunately, are victims of the public school system themselves. They have been indoctrinated at the collegiate level. Many of them are happy leftists. They don't even understand that they're not really liberals. They'll claim the mantle of liberal, and they'll try and crush free speech the first chance they get. They think it's perfectly okay to have cry closets and to create safe spaces to protect people from ideas that are new to them, that contradict their beliefs, that challenge them, that require them to actually think about why do they think that the leftist ideas are okay. Why do you think it's okay for a government to tax you to a point that you don't get to keep the rewards of your own labor, so somebody else who's done none of that labor can reap rewards? Why do you think it's okay for the government to mandate to you what you have to study and what the possibility of your future would be because of the education you receive? Excuse me. But I digress. There is an amendment to this that says that such instruction, quote, provides that the State Board of Education may post on its publicly accessible internet website recommended resources and education materials, rather than may prepare and make available to all school boards instructional materials. It says that the instruction provides that the State Board of Education may post on its publicly accessible, rather than may prepare and make available. There's a difference here. But all this educational materials that may be used by the school board for development of the instructions. Now, another amendment to the bill calls for all textbooks purchased with taxpayer money must include, quote, a study of the roles and contributions of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender people in the history of this country and this state. Now, the bill, if it's passed by the Illinois State House and then signed into law, it would take effect July 1st of 2019. So we'll be watching this as it meanders its way through. We'll see what happens. It's controversial because you still have a lot of Americans who don't want schools indoctrinating their children. Now, if the ultimate goal of the LGBT community is to be treated fairly and equally, then why does it matter if one of yours is outed? Shouldn't the name just be learned, and then later on, isn't that something more for a collegiate level to say, oh yeah, by the way, this person who did this wonderful thing, so happens that she was a lesbian. Still not a big deal. It doesn't really matter compared to what she did. It's not what made her great. She's not great because she was a lesbian. She's great because she did this. That's what you learned about her before. That's the only thing you really need to know. It's not important. It's not important that somebody happens to be transsexual but did something awesome. You're still a human being who did something awesome. Your name should be attached to it, and that should be it. You should learn that this was... That's what fairness, that's what equality really means. You have a lot of people who actually aren't necessarily even members of the LGBT community who want special treatment, not equal treatment. And that's always been part of the problem. It's always been part of the problem with any minority who lets somebody else stand as a voice for them. You have black Americans who unfortunately have people like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Louis Farrakhan who stand up and try to tell you that they're there to try and make sure that you'll not be ignored anymore. But in the whole process, they ask for special treatment, not equal treatment. And they go out of their way on occasions to try to make sure that more damage is done to race relations than anything is done to try and help repair race relations. And there's a reason for that. It's a pretty straightforward reason, too. If the problem of race relations was ever solved, if there was ever a true colorblind society here in the United States, completely and totally, where the only thing that mattered was the content of your character, borrowing a line from Martin Luther King Jr., if the only thing that mattered was the content of your character as opposed to the color of your skin, well, then those guys would be out of a job, wouldn't they? It's the same reason why politicians on both the left and the right have this really bad habit of not wanting to solve problems, not wanting to come up with solutions. Because if they do that, then heaven help them, they've lost a position of power. Their job is done. Never mind the fact that they have a chance to go down in history. Never mind the fact that they have a chance to be part of that Illinois State history curriculum, regardless of what group they fall into. Fairness and equality means that none of it matters. Stop making it about that. How hard? Isn't that supposed to be what the folks on the left are saying? Stop making it about being gay. Stop making it about being a lesbian. Stop making it being about being transgender. Let's just make it about them being human beings who did something that's worth remembering. That's what you should be learning in history classes. If that's not enough, then you're looking at the wrong thing. That's like me saying that Judge Ellis, who called out the Manafort team, again, talked about that a little more in depth in the earlier broadcast today. Check it out. Refer back to it. But it's like pointing out, and I did point out in the earlier broadcast, just so people would know, Judge Ellis happens to be a person of color. That should not be the most important part of the story, but as far as the left is concerned, you almost have to point it out to everybody just so that they realize that it's not just some other white guy. It's not some white supremacist trying to help Trump hide his collusion. It's simply a judge that takes his job as a defender of the Constitution seriously. It's a judge who understands that the law has to be narrow and has to be focused in order to be accurate and to provide actual justice. That's what this man has done. I would recommend at some point down the road, after this chapter in American history is over and it gets written, I would recommend that this man deserves at least a paragraph. Because I think it's a big part of where the turning point in ending the Mueller investigation is really going to happen. And I think that it does not matter that he is a black American. I think that it does not matter that this is a person of color, that he was a minority. I would think that what matters is that he is, as far as the current judicial system is concerned, a minority in so much as he still believes in the Constitution of the United States. And as such, he should be respected and remembered. And I don't care if you make a big deal out of his color or not. Because at the end of the day, just like I said with this other, it shouldn't matter what color you are. It shouldn't matter what religion you were. It shouldn't matter if you were part of some ethnic group or not. All that matters is that if you did something that is worth remembering, then that should be the tipping point. Let's remember Justice. Let's remember this justice, this judge, Justice Ellis, for standing up, doing the right thing in the courtroom, and not just sitting there and taking crap and demanding that he be treated with respect as a judge. A U.S. district judge should be treated with some respect. Whether they're a leftist activist or not, they should be treated with respect. That doesn't mean that I can't get behind this microphone and criticize and call into question the thought process of the leftist activist judges. It just means if you're in their courtroom, well, then you're in their courtroom and you had better treat them with respect. Here's something else. Another part of the culture wars that is vital, and I haven't had a chance to talk about it yet, and that is the rebranding of the Boy Scouts. So let's talk about the rebranding of the Boy Scouts. I'm not going to take a long time here, because this is something we've seen happening for a while. The left's attacks and eventual destruction of the Boy Scouts. We've talked about it in the past. I've laid out the rationale and the reason why the left would want the Boy Scouts destroyed. Because first and foremost, the Boy Scouts were a religious organization that taught patriotism and taught American exceptionalism. And it taught personal responsibility. It taught you how to be able to survive if you were out in the woods by yourself. It taught a good many things that leftists don't want you believing or thinking or knowing for a second. See, learning to be self-sufficient is one step away from expecting to get to be independent. If you're expecting to be independent, you're expecting to get to enjoy the blessings of individual liberty. It also means that you have to be prepared to accept individual responsibility. Now, if you believe in liberty and you believe in personal responsibility, then you certainly don't believe that the federal government should have the power to run your life. Leftists don't like that idea. They don't want young people in this country anymore getting the notion that they actually can be responsible for themselves and that they might have a civic duty, a civic responsibility to be kind and thoughtful and generous to their neighbors, to their fellow man, to the people in the neighborhood, whether they know them, whether they even like them or not. No. We need neighbors to be suspicious of each other and watching each other and prepared to report their neighbors to Big Brother. We need Americans to be suspicious of one another. We need walls divided. We need multiple labels. We need to be concerned about that history that teaches the greatness of LGBT, because those people are different. By continuing to make the issue about the labels, they work to continue to keep us all separated. The longer we're separated, the longer we're pulled apart, the longer we fight amongst ourselves, squabble, the longer we have this culture war, the further the left gets in winning that war. There are a lot of people right now who are convinced that they're enemies in our culture war, in our battle for the soul of this nation. Convinced because of the actions of the leftist. Convinced because we have allowed ourselves to accept these labels, because lots of times we don't even understand what these labels mean. First and foremost, we should see each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. And I don't care if you're a Christian or not. As a Christian, and any of the rest of you who are Christians, that's how we should see the rest of the world. We have a responsibility to care for them as we would ourselves, even if they're not Christian. We should try to save them. It is the Great Commission, after all. But those of us who are Christians, there is no question that is where we should be. Boy Scouts were about faith. That's why most Boy Scout troops that are still around are actually still sponsored by churches, and a lot of them have always been sponsored by churches. But this is where we're at now. By the time these Boy Scouts get to a certain age, well, we'll see how many of these girls who join the Boy Scouts will want to stay, because part of the rebranding is to make it okay for girls to join. Now, there are already the Girl Scouts. And unless you happen to be conservative and you believe the way I do, and that being that the Girl Scouts need to end their association with Planned Parenthood, then you have the Girl Scouts as an option. And I don't want you withholding your daughters from Girl Scouts if you believe the Girl Scouts need to end their association with Planned Parenthood, which I firmly believe they do. Haven't bought a Girl Scout cookie in years. For the first time ever, had people mad at me this year because of it, because they wanted me to buy some of their cookies. I said, sorry. Until the Girl Scouts end their association with Planned Parenthood, I'm not going to do anything else in support of the program. And I'm not. Folks got mad, but I stuck to my guns. Sorry. Didn't mean to offend anyone. But the truth of the matter is, it's up to the parents, especially parents of participating children, to push and put pressure on and to make that happen. And there is absolutely no reason why Planned Parenthood, the number one purveyor of abortions in this country, personally responsible for the death of millions of unborn children every year, blood on their hands, demanding taxpayer subsidies to help supplement their non-abortion practices, despite the fact that they get millions of dollars in contributions every year from the private sector. They don't need federal taxpayer dollars to fund their operations. They don't. They don't need it. But they continue to demand it. And every time somebody brings up the fact that, oh, by the way, we should stop giving taxpayer dollars to them because whether they directly use it for abortions or not, it still certainly makes it more feasible and more economic for them to commit abortions. As long as there's a taxpayer that has a fundamental abhorrence to abortion, which if you are a living, breathing human with a soul, you should have. I'm sorry, it is not a privacy issue. It's not a personal issue. It's a murdering unborn children issue. If you have a soul, you should be concerned. You can disagree with me all you want. You're not going to change my mind. If I can't change your mind, then that's fine too. We can disagree. But I'm still going to express my opinion on it. So we have this. And the question mark is exactly how long are girls going to be allowed to participate in the Boy Scouts? To what age is there going to be? Because there's going to have to be a cutoff. There has to be. You can't have preteen and early teenage boys and girls going camping in the woods together. I mean, it's hard enough now, the way the rules have changed over the last little bit about what troop masters and chaperones can and can't do when they're on these trips. And I've heard a lot of this, as I know a scout troop leader. He's told me a lot of his struggles to try and follow the rules and still maintain discipline and still teach the lessons that he knows Boy Scouts was intended to teach. So there still has to be a cutoff. But, and maybe a lot of these young girls who just don't want to be in Girl Scouts and want to be in Boy Scouts because Boy Scouts sounds cooler or more fun or whatever the rationale is, maybe most of them, and I would imagine they probably will, maybe most of them will simply outgrow the desire and will either join the Girl Scouts later or just leave Scouts altogether. And either one of those is fine. But what happens in the cases where they don't? I mean, what could possibly go wrong once they reach a certain age and they're out in the woods? Because, again, there's only so much that the chaperones and the troop leaders are allowed to do in intervening. And there's only so much they could do anyway. I mean, you only have so many pairs of eyes. And at some point, you do need to get some rest, because while you're out camping, you're supposed to do the hiking, you're supposed to teach the survival skills. Normally, it's going to require a certain amount of rest. I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar with camping, and unfortunately, we live in America today where a lot of people are not, and that's very unfortunate, because it's something that you should at least do from time to time, so that you'll learn the skills. It requires that these people be involved with teaching skills. So if these folks get to a certain age, I mean, again, I ask, what could possibly go wrong? I think I know. I think there could be a lot of not so nice things. But at the end of the day, the whole rebranding of the Boy Scouts, the whole allowing of girls to join, as long as you have the Girl Scouts, I think boys need a place to just be boys. You know, it's part of the development. Of course, we live in an age where we are now taught, where we're led to believe, we're trying to be indoctrinated. We're being told, even the older folks among us are trying to be convinced that masculinity, honest to goodness, maleness is somehow a mental disorder, that it is toxic. I mean, that is literally the terminology that's used on college campuses now. Toxic masculinity. Look, there's nothing toxic about masculinity. Men should be men. When men stop being men, you think things are bad now, you think there's violence now, you're going to be 1,000 times worse. Because I promise you, they're not doing these same ultra-leftist, tree-hugging, crazy metrosexual, have to be more effeminate than any kind of maleness. It's not happening elsewhere around the world. It's happening in Western Europe. It's happening in Canada. It's happening here in the United States. Outside of those locations, you know, the bastages of Western civilization, the places where the idea of republics and liberties and the concept of freedom of expression and freedom of speech and individual liberty, places where these concepts were once held dear, where people were once prepared to stand and possibly sacrifice their life if need be to protect the very notion of the concept. Those are the places that are targeted by this ultra-leftist ideology. And I promise you, every place that falls outside of that realm, you don't see or hear this kind of BS. You want to talk about toxic masculinity? There are places where the level of masculinity in this world have reached a toxic level, and it is the zero tolerance level of the places that have Sharia law as the dominant law in their nation. Places where women are not allowed to go out in public without a chaperone, where women are not allowed to show their face, where women aren't allowed to drive, and in some cases still aren't even allowed to get an education. That's toxic masculinity. Places where homosexuals are taken to the top of buildings and tossed off simply because they're homosexual. That's toxic masculinity. Here in the States we have people that occasionally aren't the brightest and who get a little drunk and say stupid things. That's not toxic. And it's salvageable. Because 9 times out of 10, stuff like that happens to folks that are still fairly young. They have this glorious lack of life experience. The United States is one of the most tolerant places on the planet. Everything is tolerated except for whiteness, for maleness, and Christianity. Somehow those very things that built this republic and helped to create it with the help of others are the very things that are now shunned and shamed. And of course somebody's going to accuse me of white supremacy ideology here. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that this nation was built by a lot of different people. But because this nation was built by Europeans who came and created it, there were a lot of those folks who were white. There were a lot of the leadership that were male. But they laid the groundwork that allowed us to eventually get to the point where we could have women's suffrage. They laid the groundwork where we could eventually get to the civil rights. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. They laid the groundwork where we could build a nation where everyone could eventually, honestly, embrace and enjoy individual liberty. And the left started trying to tear it down even before the Constitution was written. Don't let them win. That's all I'm saying here. Don't let our differences actually keep us divided. That's insanity. We shouldn't let that be the case. We can't allow that to be the case. We have to do better. We have to do more. And the sad truth is that conservative ideology does more to protect everyone than anything the leftist has put up. They claim to be inclusive. They claim to want to protect, but every single thing that they do just works to keep us labeled and keep us in our own little boxes and keep us away from each other. And the longer we're away from each other and not having honest discussions with one another, the longer we allow divides to be created, and the bigger those divides get, and the higher those walls that are built up get, and the harder it'll be for us to break through them. That's not an America I want to live in. It's not a world I want to live in. I want to live in a world where we don't have to worry about terrorism. I want to live in a world where we don't have to worry about race riots. I want to live in a world where the biggest problem we face is trying to decide what to watch on television, which book to read, what to have for dinner. See, those are problems. Those are problems that people who are living life well have. Those are problems who are people who aren't facing down poverty have. Those are problems that I wish the entire world had instead of the problems a lot of us face. It's aggravating. It's hurtful. It is what it is. And some of it's just pretty crazy. But, you know, the bottom line here as far as the Boy Scouts rebranding and the whole thing, boys need time and space to just be themselves. That's part of that growing. It's part of learning that masculinity is not toxic. It's part of learning how to get along socially with other guys. It's part of understanding that there are role models that you can follow and that it's possible to be a good guy and still just be a guy. Girls need their own space, too. They need time when they're just around other girls. They still are going to get that with the Girl Scouts. The Boy Scouts have been bending, and the problem is, even with this rebranding, even with this effort to be, quote, more inclusive, all you're actually going to end up doing is continuing to punish boys for being boys. All you're going to end up doing is emasculating even more young men. And you're going to continue to keep us divided in the name of being inclusive. It's a bad thing. But the Boy Scouts, even with this effort, they're still on the path to being completely annihilated, and the left isn't going to be satisfied until they do. Unless they can actually get the Boy Scouts completely changed to the point that there is no longer any religious or moral values attached to it, and that they're not actually taught how to be independent anymore, that they're not taught to be responsible. If they can make the Boy Scouts to be just like any other activity in the schoolhouse where they get to be indoctrinated with leftist ideas, then they will finally leave the Boy Scouts alone. But at that point, they're not really the Boy Scouts anymore, are they? In fact, you can make the case that they're not really the Boy Scouts anymore now. Something else that pops up in the name of inclusiveness seems that the Episcopal Church, it's become a dead and dying place. And they had actually the moment that their Anglican brothers overturned a long-time ban on contraception at the 1930 Lambeth Conference. But since then, the Episcopalians have been running around in circles as it tries to pin the tail on the theological donkey, if you will, on top of delivering a nuclear blast to traditional marriage back in 2015. The U.S. Episcopal Church now seeks to further increase their woke credentials by totally nixing the term husband and wife. They're going to take it completely out of their marriage lexicon. References to procreation are going to be taken out as well. They're not going to mention it. Why? Because procreating insists on having men and women. See, I'll continue with the article, and then I'll give you my 2 cents. According to the LifeSite News, the proposed changes are meant to satisfy the LGBT crowd who find the current language exclusionary. The only opposition has come from the Anglican Church, which has little more than a ceremonial relationship with the Episcopalians at this point. See, back in October, Church of England Secretary General William Nye sent the TEC a threatening letter saying that they will cut ties should they go forward with the changes. The letter did little to displace the momentum. Quote, "The new service removes the phrase, the union of husband and wife, and replaces it with the union of two people," according to the report in the UK Telegraph. It also replaces the section which talks about part of God's intention for marriage being for the procreation of children with the phrase, for the gift of children, to make it more relevant for same-sex couples who may want to adopt. Some members in the Anglican Communion have voiced support for the TEC proposal, including the Bishop of Buckingham, Alan Wilson, along with 30 of the 483 members of the C of E ruling synod. The Anglican LGBT group One Body, One Faith, recently penned an open letter calling the TEC's proposed changes courageous, just, and of course, they threw in, just for good measure, Christ-like. Oh, Dios mío. The letter continued by saying it should not need saying, but it bears repeating. No one is attracted to a group of Christians who profess the love of Christ but seem incapable of recognizing it in the loving, committed relationships of two people. These matters are not disconnected. Sounds like leftist doublespeak to me. Anyway, at least the U.S. Episcopal Church has not followed the Church of Sweden down the rabbit hole of castrating God by removing all references to he, him, of Father from their lexicon. However, that has happened in Sweden, and I would imagine you'll see it throughout the rest of the Episcopal Church, throughout Europe, and even into Canada. Here's the problem. Religion is based on doctrine. And the questions of faith are sometimes personal. Sometimes you have to try and figure out where you fall. But the unquestionable, the undoubtable, the inalienable part of faith is that at some point you have to accept that as a human being you are flawed. And any time a denomination, a faith, a belief changes to accommodate flaws, and in this case this is a flaw according to doctrine. So understand, I'm referencing doctrine at this point. Homosexuality, according to the Christian Bible, is a sinful behavior. It doesn't mean you have to accept it. It doesn't mean you have to believe it. You don't have to be Christian. Welcome to the world 2018. Doesn't make it okay. Doesn't make it whatever. You're going to believe what you want to believe. But doctrine, church doctrine, there's not a lot of room for change. The Bible isn't changing. It's not just some old document that's no longer relevant in the world today. I'm sorry, it's not. So if your denomination has to change to make accommodations for what is a violation of church doctrine, then you should question whether or not your denomination is worth continuing to follow. You can't change your faith to make you feel good. Does Jesus love you regardless of whether you're gay, straight, homosexual, purple with one eye? Yes, Jesus loves you, and he wants you to come to him. He wants you to embrace the love of Jesus, and he wants you to come to heaven. He does. But sin exists within the world, and it exists within humanity, and none of us achieve perfection. It's up to us to walk our path. It's up to us to garner forgiveness and to make our way to heaven based on following our faith and following Christ. You know, I will give a Hindu a pass on something like this because the Hindu's never been taught that that's a bad thing. It's not a violation of their doctrine. I'll give a Taoist a pass. I will give a Muslim a pass. But the problem is Muslims have been taught that in a case like this, that same-sex activity is so abhorrent that they want to kill you even if you're technically not an infidel in their mind because you're still participating in an activity that's abhorrent in the eyes of Allah. They're throwing you off of buildings for crying out loud. At least Christians and Jews just get decapitated. Getting thrown off a building is something they may have to do more than once before they've offed you. It's intended to be terrifying and excruciating and for you to suffer before your death. You should think about that. the whole purpose of marriage. Marriage has, for the entire history of humanity, existed, regardless of religious ideologies or even pre-religions, pre-Christianity at the very least. It's been between a man and a woman with the idea of procreating, the idea of perpetuating the species. Now, in my way of thinking, states are free to do whatever they want to do. They can establish whatever. The federal government has no jurisdiction on the matter of marriage. It's not an issue of equal treatment under the law because guess what? If you treated a heterosexual couple the same way as you treated a same-sex couple in regards to how you were allowing them to marry, then that is equal treatment. It's not what they want, but it is, by the strictest definition, equal treatment. If you were heterosexual, you're not allowed to marry another guy if you're a guy, or another woman if you're a woman. If you're homosexual, you're not allowed to marry another guy if you're a guy, another woman. That is equal treatment because both parties are being treated exactly the same. The part that they want to make the argument is, of course, the heterosexuals don't want to do that. That's not relevant to the definition. People never want to hear that, but it is a legitimate argument, and I've heard many attorneys admit that that is the case. It's not a matter of interpretation either. Now, folks who want to argue against that are activists, and they're trying to change opinion. They're trying to influence the court. And, of course, they will disagree. They will say, no, that's just not accurate. But they have an agenda, and that agenda isn't applying the law equally. That agenda is to move forward their political ideology, to move the political football forward. The progressive army marches on. The destruction of traditional marriage, the destruction of traditional family. That's the ultimate goal. And while hearing that might hurt some people's feelings, it's not intended to be an attack on anyone. It's just a simple truth. You, as a homosexual, are being used by the leftist because they find you to be a sympathetic group of people. And let's face facts. If conservatives, and Christians in particular, who stand against the idea of same-sex marriage even now, if they didn't find you sympathetic as human beings who are simply trying to live your lives and enjoy the love you found, then you wouldn't be useful to the left. You wouldn't be able to help them move the progressive football down the field. It just wouldn't work. You have to be sympathetic, and you have to be sympathetic to more than just the leftist. And that brings us back to the point I keep trying to make, is that conservatives typically feel a lot of the same emotions that leftists do. But at the end of the day, conservatives still fall back on principles as a guiding line, facts and logic as a guiding line, and understanding that when you let emotions make your decisions for you, when you let emotions cloud your decisions, more often than not, the wrong decisions get made. There are clear patterns of detriments to society when we go down certain paths. Question: is a faith worth following if it's so willing to change its belief system as a whole to accommodate the feelings of a few people? If it's willing to change how it treats doctrine based on a political agenda as opposed to a spiritual one? That's why this is a question. This is why it's important, and that's why it's part of the culture war. So that's another culture war story. Real quick hit. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I think it's certainly worth mentioning just because, well, it's kind of funny more than anything. A little over a week ago, turns out that a homeless man happened to have broke into California Governor Jerry Brown's house. Dude was homeless, needed a place to stay. And when he was taken into custody, his statement, his accusation was, quite frankly, he thought it would be okay because, well, Brown has just been an open-door policy kind of guy. Digging on the sanctuary state status that he keeps trying to push, he got a taste of his own medicine, of what it's like to suddenly have somebody showing up at your place that doesn't belong there. So it was just kind of cute. It's not a big deal, certainly not a big story, but kind of funny, though. Also mentioned in the earlier broadcast today, Project Veritas video showing a teacher union's president admitting that he actually helps teachers hide occasions of abuse of students. If you want to hear more about that, go back and listen to the earlier broadcast. Went into depth there. Also mentioned Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a capitalist, as it turns out. And that's the new reason why she couldn't win the election. She is just too much of a capitalist, and that's just not where the Democrats are today. That's probably actually the truest thing she's said, well, possibly in decades. She is a capitalist, and she's looking to capitalize, as we speak, on her email list. It would appear that she is charging the DNC nearly $2 million. The exact amount actually is $1.65 million, so I'm rounding it up. Nearly $2 million. The DNC is paying $1.65 million to Clinton's new group, Onward Together, for access to its email list and other voter data. So that's certainly very capitalist of her. It's certainly very opportunistic of her. A lot of the Democratic Party members, however, seem to think that she should just donate this information and that she should refund the DNC its money because, well, the DNC is currently millions of dollars in debt, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that when Debbie Wasserman Schultz was in charge, well, basically Hillary Clinton was actually in charge, and she ran the coffers dry and took out loans so the DNC could help her with her campaign. But she's been going to all these events, and she, of course, starts out by saying she accepts full responsibility for her loss in the general election. And then she almost immediately proceeds to tell everybody about all the different reasons about why she lost, blaming everyone from sexist husbands to wives who weren't willing to get inside those ballot boxes and defy their husbands, to the basket of deplorable folks. And now she's brought herself down to Democrats that just saw Bernie Sanders as being too sexy. She just wasn't socialist enough. She actually used the word socialist in describing where the Democratic Party is today. So, for the first time in a long time, a truth bomb dropped by Hillary Rodham Clinton. That's great. And I mentioned that earlier, but it's certainly worth mentioning again. Let's see here. Some other quick hits, just as FYI, that would have been discussed in passing. Well, at least one more quick hit. There's a chance, nothing settled just yet, but there is a chance that we could see Tim Allen on television again real soon with the potential return of Last Man Standing. Now, can't be sure yet, but Tim Allen has suggested that a reboot might be in the works. He tweeted out very enigmatically for a little while back, saying, quote, "They heard all your voices, people." And then also said a little later, Last Man Standing just might be a reality. So, don't know yet, which is why this is just a quick hit, but wouldn't it be great to see Last Man Standing back on TV? It was a fun show. And a lot of people think the reason ABC canceled it had more to do with the fact that it showed a sympathetic and likable conservative doing what conservatives do, thinking that that had something to do with Donald Trump actually winning. Yeah, I don't think that had as much to do with it as they would like to think, but it is what it is. And another great thing about being here at Spreaker for this particular broadcast, I got a little more time, so I can use that time. which, I'm running over the 2-hour mark now, and I'm going to keep going for just a little bit further. But it won't be much longer, I promise you that much. So those of you who stay with me to the end, thank you. I appreciate it. This is some of the stuff I didn't get to, but would have liked to. This one is another fun story, in so much as what it means. It seems that a D.C. think tank has won a Freedom of Information Act case against the climate crusading New York Attorney General. See, a New York court ordered AG Eric Snyderman this past Thursday to fork over public information about elements of his climate crusade to a libertarian think tank in the Washington, D.C. area. The New York Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the CEI, in a case involving a series of documents conservatives believe could reveal a coordinated campaign against global warming dissenters. Those of us who are climate deniers, or as they refer to as science deniers. Well, if you'll remember, several months back, we talked about this effort to start going after anyone who voiced a idea or concept of dissent against the idea. They wanted to legally punish. They wanted to be able, literally, to put climate scientists in jail and media members in jail if they said anything that sounded the least bit controversial or contradictive to the model that the leftists want you buying into when it comes to man-caused climate change. Dun, dun, dun. Well, it seems that the Competitive Enterprise Institute believes that the New York Attorney General happened to have some documents in hand that would lead to showing some of this coordinated campaign against the global warming dissenters. So Snyderman has consistently used his state's Freedom of Information law to block past requests. The appellate division, however, is the latest court to reject the Attorney General's bogus excuses for hiding information from the public. The CEI attorney Anna St. John said in a press statement announcing the decision that, quote, "We hope this ruling will encourage the Attorney General to be more transparent about his office's activities." Allow me to say fat chance at that point, but the CEI requested the documents which could show whether Snyderman worked with other states or environmental activists to subpoena global warming dissenters. After the Virgin Islands AG in April of 2016 hit the think tank with a subpoena for 10 years of emails and donor records. So their belief was, when they were subpoenaed to give up this information, that was the starting point of this coordinated effort against anybody who challenges the notion of man-caused climate change, or at least the impact that man actually has on climate change. Now, the think tank has won similar cases against Snyderman in the past. Acting Supreme Court Justice Henry Zwack, this is New York State Supreme Court, FYI, ordered Snyderman in November of 2016 to hand over so-called common interest agreements CEI requested back in May of that year. The crusading AG tried using the Freedom of Information exemption in a case to no avail. Snyderman has yet to comply with that court's order, just FYI. How many people in a position like that, and, well, I mean, forget people in a position like that, how many everyday citizens would be allowed to just ignore a court decision like that? Anyway, Snyderman has sought to use the Freedom of Information exemptions on other occasions, too. Excuse me, and I guess I'm going to have to wrap it up soon. My voice is going, but tried to use it for exemptions in the past to deny conservative groups access to documents as well. The AG used Freedom of Information exemptions to hide emails showing he is colluding with wealthy environmentalists to take down ExxonMobil. E&E Legal made that claim back in March of 2017. E&E believes that the New York Democrat is refusing to disclose documents indicating wealthy California environmentalist prodded Snyderman into investigating the oil company's climate science. Snyderman is legally entitled to keep internal communications private, but is obliged to fork over information sent to outside parties. So, it seems like some of this should be out. Now, Snyderman's aide, Christina Harvey, sent an email in October of 2016 to her boss and an outside political consultant by the name of Christy Stiles. And the group told Judge Arlene Bluth that Harvey's email, as well as those sent to other outsiders, should not be protected. And that's what E&E Legal argued. So basically what we see going on now is pushback. Well-earned, well-deserved pushback against the wannabe environmentalists who seem to think the ends justify the means. Again, another common tactic by the left. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how many rules we break. It doesn't matter how many laws we break. It doesn't matter how many people we hurt in the process, either reputations or otherwise. We're trying to save the world, and you need to stop questioning our means and our tactics, and you just need to get on board, get with the tactics, get with the program, help us save the world, because we, as the office holders, are going to get rich in the process. Oops, I wasn't supposed to mention that part. Because it's funny how that happens, right? It's funny how Al Gore made money off of a movie and made money off of a carbon credit company the whole time he was pushing the idea, pushing the notion, the very thought that somehow the world was coming to an end. Now let's go back to the original and inconvenient truth. How many of the predictions in that movie have come true? Zero. None. Nada. In fact, most of the predictions he's made have been blatantly shown to be false. Blatantly false. The exact opposite has happened. And of course, the left continues to claim that that's just proof we was right, is the timetable was off. It's just like every model about climate change has been wrong since the beginning. They have yet to be willing to admit that there were flaws in the models. The science is not settled. And let me tell you something. The second somebody says science is settled, every real scientist needs to get on board with the idea of trying to prove otherwise. No one in the realm of science has ever set themselves apart, has ever earned adoration of other scientists by simply following in line with the common dogma. As soon as science is settled, it's not science anymore. And scientists believe, scientists look for, scientists want to prove the paradigm incorrect so that their name will go down in memoriam. So this whole notion of settled science when it comes to man-caused climate change, for so many people to be on board with that, well, it means that, well, science isn't at play. But dollar bills are. These books have been bought off, plain and simple. So it's good to see folks are pushing back, and it's good that maybe the truth can be brought out. A couple of other stories I want to get to real quick. We'll do this, and after these two, we'll call it, even though I'm still nowhere near caught up. Actually, I still haven't even talked about Alfie Evans yet. So I will do that. So we'll make it 3. But we'll start with this one. Did you know that Harvard, yes, that Harvard, did you know that they're offering a social justice certification now? Benjamin Franklin was quoted as saying, "Tell me, and I forget. Teach me, and I remember. Involve me, and I learn." Well, welcome to Education in 2018. Graduate students at the esteemed Harvard University, arguably the most prestigious institution in the country, one of the most in the world, well, they are now being offered a series of online courses for about $10,000 to earn a certificate in social justice. The course to earn this social justice certificate comprises 16 credit hours and takes about a year and a half to complete. It is described as follows. Explore theoretical and practical questions of economic, political, and social rights through a variety of lenses. Through this liberal arts graduate certificate, you'll learn about core themes of social justice, including philosophy, economics, and in the environment, religion, politics, ethics. I didn't think ethics really applied in most of these cases. Sociology and law. Obviously, you have to know the law before you can effectively break it. Who better to try to destroy the Constitution than someone who's a constitutional scholar, right? Now, the certificate description also contains bullet points, a list of key learning outcomes, and I'd like to go over a few of those with you, if you don't mind. Bullet point number 1, build knowledge of classical and contemporary theories of justice and explore interrelated topics such as human rights, affirmative action, income distribution, and the role of markets. Another bullet point, develop an understanding of the economic systems such as capitalism, socialism, and the welfare state, and societal structures conducive towards cultivating a just community. Yeah, no pretense and none at all there. No pretense. Certainly not pretentious at all. Nope, not any. Societal structures conducive towards cultivating a just community. Gah. All right, another bullet point. Gain insight into political and social justice issues that drive human actions and responses to global challenges, such as the environment, poverty, and development. Understand principles of social justice as they relate to topics such as education, government, health, media, and religion. All right, I already understand the principles of social justice as they relate to these things. As they relate to education, end all education and create indoctrination instead. As they apply to government, end all idea of individual liberty and force socialism on everybody. Health, if we socialize health, then we control their lives. Media, if the media is on our side, then we win. And religion, we have to squash all religion that doesn't perpetuate the idea and the notion that the state is the true God. The state is the true power. Believe in the state. Trust in the state. Give yourself over to the state. Something tells me I would not earn a certificate in social justice from Harvard if I made that assertion, however. See, the certification is also comprised of elective courses, as there are no specific course requirements to earn their certificate other than the requirement to complete a social justice foundational course. Now, the electives offered include courses such as the minimum wage debate, readings in black radicalism, the culture of capitalism, and possibly the most wisdom-inducing one, chocolate, culture, and the politics of food. I know what you're thinking. I wish I was making this up. I am not. Now, the certification promises that those who earn it will be well-versed in classical and contemporary theories of justice, that they will have an understanding of human rights, affirmative action, income distribution, and the role of markets, and that they will in fact gain insight into policy and social justice issues that drive human actions and responses to global challenges such as the environment, poverty, and development. So, basically, welcome to the Twilight Zone. See, apparently, these adults, viewed as some of the smartest students in the country by virtue of the school they attend, have nothing better to do with their time or money. Also, the loans the students incur will most likely not be paid off, as these degrees or certifications offer no path to a decent job. We really do live in incredibly frightening times, don't we? Because it's just this example that is the problem. You know, it isn't just this example that's the problem. It is that this example is also indicative of a much larger problem in higher education and the left's ever-growing monopoly over universities. Conservatives on campus, as well as professors, have consistently been shunned and boxed out. Many are even afraid of articulating their views on politics, culture, and the world at large for fear of losing their jobs or being verbally or physically attacked. As a result, the leftist worldview fills the pervasive vacuum, and this is a worldview of nihilism and intolerance for other opinions, regardless of the word tolerance being thrown around like there's no tomorrow. We witness the consistent rise of safe spaces, trigger words, and riots when non-leftists want to speak on campus. We need a crying closet. We need a crying closet. Here comes Ben Shapiro. I need a crying closet. Find me a safe space. Find me a safe space. Tim Tapp is tapping into the truth again. Find me a safe space. Now, the end result is its logical conclusion that the university becomes a leftist progressive echo chamber where what's taught is nothing more than progressive ideas. And these ideas result in nothing that can help graduates in the real world and nothing that prepares students for life. Participation trophies and safe spaces and crying closets don't help you to compete in a world where you don't get trophies for just participating, where just showing up isn't good enough. You have to provide results. Those messages, courses, and degrees are what turns them into eventual foot soldiers for the progressive movement. So what should be done? Well, there are far more questions on this issue than there are solutions, I'm afraid. There exist two schools of thought on this, both of which hold merit. One is that people should self-educate rather than spend money and waste time being indoctrinated. The other, and even more daunting prospect, is being that the student or educator on campus who is willing to buck the trend and be steadfast in their beliefs and always willing to question authority figures, whether vocally or introspectively. Both of these options can be good, and each person should do whatever's best for them. I certainly can't be the one to tell you what to do. Follow your heart. Listen to your inner voice. But taking the third road, which involves blindly following authority merely because the authority figure is more educated, well, that's certainly a recipe for disaster. This ever-increasing trend seen across our country will sadly lead to the decline of both student and institution. So, that's where we're at. Harvard with a certificate in social justice. Harvard making some extra money on the side. Now, for those of you who just graduated college, as we are in that time of year, after all, getting to high school graduations and the like. Here's something to keep in mind as you're looking to what college courses you should be looking at. I'm sorry, taking a brief moment. We've already seen the kiosks in the fast food restaurants where you're placing your orders with the machine. We've already seen the self-checkouts at the Walmarts and other big box stores. We've seen self-checkouts show up in grocery stores across the country. Now, 5 robots replaced 7 workers at a Swiss bank when the robots were shown to be more efficient. Now, according to the Daily Mail, quote, the robots were able to do the same work as a human employee but could work 24/7 without a break, making them overall more effective. The pilot project at St. Galler Cantonal Bank, SGKB for short, went so well that the bank has decided to take on more robots at the end of the month. In the test run, SGBK acquired the private banking business of W.M. Warburg Bank AG. Since both had differing IT systems, the robots were used to successfully implement the W.M. Warburg customer data into the SGKB IT system. There's a lot of letters getting thrown around here, but here's what that really means for those of you who don't follow the jargon. These 2 different banks use completely different computerized systems. And rather than have a human translate all of the bank that was absorbed information into the same type of system, database, the IT system used by the bank that did the absorbing, they had 5 robots do it instead. So, yay, robots are taking our jobs. Now, this happened the same way as if it were done manually by an employee. The robot took the data from the field of the Excel file and transferred it to the corresponding field in the system of the bank. This according to the General Secretary of the banking system, the SGKB. Since this was a pilot program, the robots did not replace existing jobs. Quote, we've seen that's technically feasible, and now we're exploring whether other applications are worthwhile. And I'm very optimistic about that. This was Felix Boscher, a member of the SGKB Management Board, and he said that in an interview with Bloomberg. Employees at the bank now fear that they may be replaced. Managers stressed that will not be happening. However, as we have always compensated efficiency gains through natural fluctuation, and because we paid close attention to enabling our employees to develop new technologies, the acceptance is high. And this is also a quote from Brochure. Not all experimental robot employees work out successfully. In Scotland, a robot assistant at a supermarket received a pink slip just after 1 week on the job. The shop bot, named Fabio, was developed by Harriet Watt University with the function of giving customers high fives, hugs, and greetings of "hello, gorgeous." However, in a few days, Fabio became more irritating while confusing shoppers. I can see that. You don't want a robot coming up and giving you a hug. And if it happens once, okay, there's a novelty. If this is your 3rd trip to the grocery, all right, I get it, you're a robot. I'm trying to shop now. I can see that. So, anyway, when customers ask where... when a customer asked where he could find a beer, Fabio gave the laziest answer in the English lexicon. It's in the alcohol section. No wonder the customers got miffed. They're used to a helpful AI like Alexa. Alexa can tell you just about anything you want to know, right? Evidently, Fabio was nowhere near as helpful. But here's the plain and simple thing. All you high school graduates trying to think about what career path you're going to follow and what you should study if you go to university, you might want to stay away from those social justice classes and look for something that's actually going to help you with a career. I'm making no suggestions at this point. It's your life, but if they can do it in banking, if they can do it in fast food, there will be others. There will be others. All right, so now let's do the Alfie Evans conclusion. I almost hate to even bring it up now because it seems like we're just revisiting a bad place. But again, I think it's necessary to point out. I think it's necessary to show you that this is an example of what happens with socialized medicine. Alfie Evans was a victim, just like Charlie Gard before him. He was the victim of a government that deems it more important to control the life and death of citizens rather than give them an opportunity, even if it's a slim one, to find a solution. Alfie Evans probably would have died anyway. We're not far enough down the road of research to definitively say that there's a treatment that would have worked. The leftist ideology that we heard in the courts and the advocates for the hospital and the doctors on staff, they all talked about death with dignity. That it better suited, that it better served young Alfie to be taken off life support and to be allowed to starve to death or to stop breathing in the night. It better served him to let that happen, that it would have to have let him go to Italy and receive some experimental treatment. So you see, the value of Alfie's life was insignificant. The talk about death with dignity is just that. It's just talk. You're talking about a child that wasn't quite 2 years old yet, not out of diapers. Dignity is not exactly a characteristic that you can easily associate with a 2-year-old. But just like with Charlie Gard, money had been raised. Just like with Charlie Gard, efforts were made to offer citizenship in another country so that they could leave. Every effort was made to let the UK's medical social system off the hook. They weren't going to have to pay for any of it. They would be done. The child would have most likely never come back unless there was a miraculous recovery. But they couldn't let it happen. It's more important to show the parents who's in control. It was more important to send a message to the rest of the nation that it is, in fact, the state that has control. These are now the poster children that should be hung up every time somebody talks about trying to bring socialized medicine to the United States, because this is what you get with socialized medicine. The state has control. the court system and the hospital administration worked together to form what we called, when we were talking about Obamacare, when we were talking about Hillary Care before that, when we talked about Romney Care, when we talked about socialized medicine at any extent, every time here, when a conservative talks about fighting against socialized medicine in the states, we talk about death panels. Now, ooh, it's scary. Ooh, it's hyperbole. Ooh, it's over the top. Ooh, there's no such thing. But that is exactly what these hospital administrators in the UK and the court system in the UK became, because they decided it was better to put Alfie Evans, they decided it was better to put Charlie Gard to death than to let them leave their medical system, to let them off the hook, to put the hands of payment and all these other aspects of healthcare, put it all in somebody else's hands and just let the parents take their children. They didn't even want to let their parents take their children home. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to let their parents make those final moments. And again, I've said it dozens of times now, but I will continue to say it. I do not recommend turning any child into a guinea pig. But how is medical progress made? This is a disorder that has no treatments now, but it has a ton of people working on solutions. How do we get one step closer to the next child that has this disorder being able to live? By doing research, collecting data. At the very least, they could have allowed these parents to make decisions about the attempt to prolong the lives, about an attempt to save their lives if possible, but at the very least, if not possible, to collect further data so that some other parent decades from now don't have to face the exact same hopeless situation. Treatments can be developed. Research can be done. Medical advancements could be made. Who knows how far Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans could have helped move forward the progress towards bringing a viable treatment for this disorder. If only they had been allowed to leave the UK system. If only it wasn't more important for the UK government to be able to stand up and say, sorry, the parents don't count in this issue. We get to decide. And we have decided these children, in the case of Charlie Gard and in the case of Alfie Evans, these children, we decided they're dying now. Parents, get out of the way. Public, get out of the way. Other nations trying to get involved? No. Police were monitoring Facebook posts. Security had been raised around the hospital because some voices had expressed a desire to bust into the hospital and break Alfie out and try to get him to an airport so that Alfie could be taken to Italy before Alfie's death. They were willing to spend extra time and money securing the hospital, making sure that the parents or that some concerned citizens didn't break little Alfie Evans out of the hospital, more so than they were concerned about trying to stop potential terrorist attacks, more so than they were concerned about trying to stop the sudden increase of knife violence on the streets in London. London's homicide rate has surpassed the homicide rate of New York City. First time in history. And it's showing no signs of dropping. That's not important enough. Little Alfie Evans has to be kept away from those who wanted nothing more than to give that child a chance to survive, who expressed their outrage at the fact that the state, that the government, that the socialized medical system insisted on putting its foot down and showing everybody who's in charge. You want to tell me there's no such thing as death panels in socialized medicine? I ask you, how would you categorize the events that took place with the medical administrations in these hospitals that were supposedly caring for both Charlie and Alfie? How would you characterize the judges that took the side of the hospital instead of the side of the parents? I could see if there was a case where the UK was going to literally have to put the bill. Well, we can't do this because we wouldn't just do this for anyone else. We look at the cost-benefit analysis, and we're just not going to do that. It's still not a good argument. How do you put a dollar value on life? But that's the exact point of socialized medicine. Dollar values are put on the value of quality of life or life period. What's it going to be? You reach a certain age, you're not going to live long enough for you to pay back enough in taxes to make up for what you're going to receive in benefits. At that point, you get no more benefits. That's basically how that works. You might occasionally find an exception, but generally that's the rule. That's how socialized medicine is designed to work. It wasn't necessarily a given that Alfie Evans had to die. But regardless if you believe he had a real chance through some of these experimental treatments, or if you just believe in the value of seeing how these treatments would help us to move forward, to make medical advancements, regardless of your thinking there, the real tragedy isn't that Alfie died. The real tragedy is in the fact that so many people have stood back, and after Charlie Gard died, nothing was done to change the system, and now another child died on practically the same set of circumstances. Another group of parents were denied their parental rights. They were denied their ability to control what happened with their own child. In my mind, this should be unacceptable. I don't see how anyone can side with the UK government in this case. I don't see how anyone can side with the socialized medicine program. And I don't see how anyone can deny the existence of death panels within socialized medicine constructs. That's what happened. The hospital administration and then the court system in unison became a death panel, and they condemned both Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans to death with no chance of anything. There's no chance of getting an experimental treatment. There's no chance of going to be treated by medical professionals that have stronger expertise in the field, what the child is suffering from. No, it doesn't really matter. And in Alfie's case, as soon as they unplugged him, he was supposed to die within a matter of minutes. He fought for days. Alfie Evans fought for days to hang on to life. A couple of times he stopped breathing. A couple of times his father was there and administered mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because none of the medical professionals there were allowed to do it. He administered it and he came back around. Why do I continue to rehash the story? Why do I continue to hover on this idea? Because these are two children who should not have died where they died. These children do belong to their parents, no matter what the government may think. We need to stop letting governments think they have that much control over it. This is not what laws are passed for. They're supposed to be passed to protect individuals, especially protect the weakest among us. The strongest don't need protection. The weakest often need protection from the strongest. Children need to be... But you know, when you're a leftist, When you're a leftist, it's okay to kill unborn children. And, you know, if you haven't quite got to 2 years of age yet, well, then you're still practically unborn. When you're a leftist, the government's the solution, right? It doesn't matter what the question is, government's the answer. Government, government, government. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Look out. What else can I say? What else can we do? I'm going to move on at this point, but again, this is what socialized medicine brings. This is not uncommon, and expect to see more. Thank goodness this is a relatively rare thing. But expect to see more. Maybe not the same ailments, but you will see more similar issues where these children are going to face consequences. And I just shake my head. I'm trying not to yell and scream, because here, while I'm broadcasting this live, it's gotten kind of late here in my time zone, Eastern time zone. I'm sitting here looking at the clock, and it's reading 11:24 p.m. Whenever you listen to this broadcast, whatever time it may be, understand that my mild mannerism has nothing to do with how I really feel on this issue, because I am screaming inside. And if you think I'm wrong on this issue, I would love to hear how you justify it. Feel free to let me know. Reach out. Tell me what you think. And with that, I'm going to have to close things down. This is going to have to be the end of the show. I want to thank everybody who took the time to listen, especially those of you who listened all the way through. Thank you very much. Everybody who's new to the show over at iHeartRadio, welcome. And thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed the broadcast. Those of you who listen to SoundCloud, this broadcast will certainly be found over there here shortly. And, of course, you can find us at iTunes, TuneIn.com, Stitcher.com, Podcast.com. We're syndicated practically all over the place. Hoping very soon to possibly be on Spotify. We'll see what happens with that. Meanwhile, I'm very excited about reaching new people, new audiences. I hope you guys enjoyed the show as much as I enjoy bringing it to you. And remember, don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Be prepared to put in some effort, to do your own research, use multiple sources. Don't count on just one or two. Make sure you get some points of view other than the first source you see. Be prepared to use your brain if you really want to tap into the truth. That's it for me tonight. We will start doing a few more regular broadcasts here on this platform, so we'll get the automatic updates and what have you. In the meanwhile, thank you very much for being here. That is it. This play-out song is Eye of the Hurricane, because it kind of feels like that's where we're at on a lot of occasions. Another Matt Fitzgibbon song, which I have expressed permission to use. Thank you, Matt. Please slide over to patriotmusic.com and check out Matt Fitzgibbon's stuff. Great historian, phenomenal musician, and a good friend to the show. That's it for me tonight, everybody. And we will be back Wednesday night over in the standard format. Check us out then. I'm out.
Smell the dust, feel the sun, fingers twitch just above the gun. Hear the wind cross the plain. There is no fear that I must contain, and I'm in the eye of the hurricane. see the sweat across his brow. I'm poised to draw in eternal now. The fastest one is the one who's slain. I still stand, got the better aim. And I'm in the eye of the hurricane. And I want the world to know my pain. And I want the wind to say my name. Cause I'm in the eye of the hurricane. I was passing through on my way back home to get a drink, but be left alone. They tried to take my guns, some mayor's new campaign. I told them I would leave, they pushed me just the same. And I'm in the eye of the hurricane. The world to know my pain. And I want the wind to say my name. Cause I'm in